Hello, I think I'm connected. We'll get started very shortly. Let me know in the chat if there's any difficulties with the video or audio. Okay, let's start. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Good evening, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Bhuma Devas. The word Bhuma means earth or earthly. These are the lowest class of Devas, the ones who don't live in the sagas, the heaven worlds, but live on this earth in the same cosmological space as humans and animals. And from the texts, we get the impression that the world is full of these devas. We hear most about ones that live in trees, ruka devas, but there are also devas who live in water, in on the foam of the ocean. There are devas that live in lesser plants like grasses and flowers. There are also devas that live in cities, nagara devas, town devas. We hear, for example, of one of these devas who lived in the palace of Anathapindika, the great financier, supporter of the Buddha, who had his dwelling above the doorpost at the outside wall of the compound, and he grew annoyed because Anathapindika would invite the Buddha or other monks to come for offerings, and every time they passed underneath the doorway, he was obliged to get down from his high seat so he wouldn't be above the head of the Buddha or one of the arahants. And he tried to convince Anathapindika to stop making offerings, and Anathapindika refused and drove him from his dwelling. And this Deva wandered homeless, and then the further development of the story reveals something about the way the relationship between the Devas and their hierarchy. Because first he appealed to the chief Deva of the town, and he says, "I can't help you. You've committed an offense." Then he went to the four great kings, and he finally went up to Saka. And Saka told him, he'd have to make amends to Anathapindika somehow. So he found ways of increasing Anathapindika's wealth, and he begged forgiveness, and eventually was able to return to his seat. But what we hear about most are the tree devas, the ruka devas. Now, in Buddhist theory, in Abhidhamma theory of plant life, they're not considered to be conscious or sentient beings. Plants are said to have life faculty, but not consciousness faculty. However, there's some in the stories that we find in the various sources like the Jatakas and Dhammapada. There seems to be some hint that the Ruka Devas may be uh, identified with the tree. Uh, Usually, they're portrayed as living in a dwelling in a wamana that's um, in the tree branches. But there's at least one story that comes close to identifying the life of the Deva with the tree. This is the origin story for the in the Vinaya for the rule that monks are not supposed to cut living plants. And the origin story is that some bhikkhu wanted to cut a branch off a tree to make some repairs to his dwelling. And when he hacked the branch off, uh, it cut the arm off of a young Deva. And the Deva's mother went and complained to the Buddha about it. So in this case, it looks like the limb of the tree is identified with the limb of a Deva. Um, the karma to be born as a Bhuma Deva is uh, less than the karma to be reborn in one of the higher heavens. There's a story about a man who had committed some heinous crime, and he was being led away to be executed. And one of the bhikkhus saw this and thought this fellow is going to head to a lower rebirth unless I help him. And he made himself present in the company of the crowd, and the criminal had been given a sweet cake, and by a young girl who felt sorry for him. And when he saw the bhikkhu, he offered it to the bhikkhu, and this making an offering then set him up for a rebirth in one of the heaven worlds. But at the last minute, as they were about to cut off his head, lust arose in his mind for the young girl, and he was, instead of going to heaven, he was reborn as a tree Deva. Devas are of any kind are not normally visible to human beings. The exception is that the Deva himself may choose to appear or manifest, or a person has developed the psychic power of Dibachaku, the divine eye. The senior disciple Anuruddha was said to be the supreme master of the divine eye faculty. But we have lots of stories of the Buddha interacting with Devas, and also other monks like Moggallana. The Devas are generally beneficent, but sometimes they can be mischievous. And there's one story in the Dhammapada commentary about a Deva who wanted to make, just out of a sense of mischief, he wanted to make trouble for a bhikkhu, and the bhikkhu was with some companions, and he excused himself to go off into the bushes to relieve himself. And when he emerged, this Deva manifested as the form of a beautiful young woman with her clothes all messed up, and she was rearranging her clothes and walking close behind the bhikkhu. And then he got a bad reputation for that until the Deva fessed up to everybody what she had done. In some few cases, we have stories about Devas actually doing harm to humans, but it's when the humans have committed some grave offense against them. There's a story in a Jataka about some people who were shipwrecked on an island and set up living there, and set up a village, and they were living on this island, and the island was full of Devas. And at first the Devas tolerated the human presence, but then one time the humans had a festival and a party, and they all got drunk, and they started relieving themselves all over on the ground and in the bushes, and making a foul mess. And the Devas were so offended by this that they caused a flood and destroyed the village. Generally, it's said that Devas of all kinds, um, they find humans kind of disgusting. We're too coarse, and they particularly don't like our smell. The exception is that an enlightened or even a virtuous person has a smell that's pleasing to the Devas. But the general run of humanity, we smell bad to the Devas. We can see this is an interesting idea that there are spirit beings like Devas living particularly in forests. We find this in many cultures around the world. In Europe, there were in the Celtic countries particularly there was fairies and pixies and leprechauns. In North America, many of the natives speak about the little folk of the forest. It seems to be a very common motif. And I think what it really means is that consciousness or sentience is much more widespread than meets the eye. That there's a consciousness all over the place. If these Devas in the forest, even in towns and in all kinds of places. So this has the presence of Devas has, I think, given Buddhists in general, historically and down to the present, a kind of a respect and reverence for nature, for natural environments, because we don't see them just as dead places, but as teeming with their own kind of life, their own consciousness. Another class of Devas, a little higher than the Bhuma Devas, but still not in heaven, are the Wahalaka Devas, the Devas of the sky, who live among the clouds and control the weather. And there are special classes of these Devas. There are rain Devas and snow Devas and wind Devas and so on. And when one of these weather forms happen, it's play for these Devas. They're enjoying themselves. They're sporting. And it's said that if humans, and they are affected by the quality of behavior of the humans. If humans are living virtuously and in accord with the Dhamma, then the Devas will send rain in due season and in appropriate amounts for the growing of crops. But if the humans are living heedlessly and wickedly, then the Devas can become upset and neglect their duties, or and cause either too much rain as a flood, or withhold the rain and cause a drought. Also, the sun and the moon are considered to be inhabited by devas. Now, these are technically called, they're not of this class. They're the next stop, the Chaturmarajika class of devas, which we'll deal with next week. But I'll talk about them here because they're not in one of the heaven worlds. They're in their own space. The sun and the moon are visualized as vimanas, as dwelling places, um, and they're teeming. They're full of devas um, that live in these gold. The sun is a golden palace, and the moon is a silver palace, and the devas live in these as they move through the sky. Returning to the earth, there's also a class of devas that are called araka, or guardian devas, and these can serve as protectors of humans, and they might be a protector of an individual human, or of a community, or a city, or um, various other groupings. Um, there's one Jataka story about uh, two kings who were having a war, and instead of letting uh, their armies fight, they let the fight be between their two Araka devas. And these two devas assumed the form of bulls, one white and one black, and they had a fight to the death. So these, like all the beings in samsara, these devas are mortal. They might live longer than humans, but they don't have the tremendously long lifespans of the higher devas. And they are beings of the sense experience realm, so they have genders. They're male and female among them, and they have relations with each other. And it seems that from some of the stories we gather that some of these devas actually reproduce sexually. They can give birth, and some of them will appear spontaneously, like the higher devas. So they're an intermediate kind of a level. They're more refined than humans, but they're not at the level of the heavenly devas. So we would, in European mythology, we would consider them as elves or fairies, spirit beings, but not terribly elevated. So I think I'll stop there as an introduction to Bhuma Devas, and I can see there's some questions already in the chat, so we'll turn to that next. Hello, Venerable. I am practicing Kuan Yin's method, listening to running water, to be exact. It's mentioned in the Surangama Sutra, one of the very best methods. Can you comment on that, please? Yes, I think that could meditate on running water. My advice in using that running water as an object is to try and maintain the clarity of the sound of the water. Don't let yourself fall into letting the mind can run away, and kind of hallucinate or create voices or music or something in the water. And at first it can be seductive, but it can be a real trap. You can get kind of stuck in that. But if you listening to the water as water, then you're practicing in a pure way. Are tree devas a concept of a guardian deity living in a tree? Um, yeah, they are. They are a guardian deva in the sense of the tree itself. You know, they live in the tree and they're associated with the tree. And when a tree is cut down, it does an injury to them. It either hurts them directly or at least renders them homeless. Could morphogenetic fields and devas be somewhat related? Well, in the theory of morphogenetic fields, devas themselves would have a morphogenetic field. There would be the idea in morphogenetic fields are arranged hierarchically, so there'd be one field for each Deva and then one field encompassing all the Devas, so that it'd be very parallel to how humans are experienced through the fields. The Devas that live in trees, are they part of the tree? Are they integrated into the tree? Or do they move freely about the tree like a squirrel would jump among the branches? They there is some ambiguity in that question. I did cite that story of the Deva who had his arm cut off, but also in the same story, his mother left the tree and went to complain to the Buddha. And generally, we see them that the tree is more like a dwelling for them. In most of the stories, that they have a vimana, a dwelling place in the tree, but they're separate entity from the tree. Similar to Christians praying to angels, do various Buddhist traditions contemplate higher realm beings in their meditations? I know entering jhana is similar to the Brahma realm. Well, I think in let's say formal or orthodox Buddhist practice, we don't pray to the devas as such, but we can contemplate them. There is one of the traditional meditations is listed in the Visuddhimagga is the Devanusati, contemplation of devas. But also, on the other hand, in, let's say, common or folk Buddhism in Asian countries, people will make offerings and pray to devas for, good health or good crops or things like that. Bhante, I have heard that the battle between suras and asuras manifests in the human realm. Is this true? Which asuras try to increase their numbers by influencing humans? Yes, though that is mentioned several times in the suttas. The way it works is that it depends on the morality of humans on this earth, who gets the upper hand in heaven. If people are rough and violent and arrogant in the human realm, if culture deteriorates in that way, then more humans, when they die, will be reborn as asuras. But if people are virtuous and generous, then more of them will be reborn as devas, and then the numbers of the armies increase or decrease respectively, and one side or the other gains the advantage. With all the manifold ways that Bhuma Devas can be offended, I recall how nearly impossible it is to live as a householder ignorant of their existence without drawing their ire. I don't know, I think that's maybe a bit extreme. I think if you don't I think if you have a respect for your environment, you don't throw rubbish into the river, for example, and offend the deities of the river, um, or just being environmentally sensitive. You're not going to offend the Devas. And I think it's a good practice if you do have cause, for example, to cut down a tree to make a small offering, some bits of food, or the Native American way is to offer a bit of tobacco when to make amends to the beings. You, so they understand you're not really wanting to harm them. Hello, Venerable. Our attainments of once returned, non-returned arahantship experiences a sudden flash, as the attainment of stream entry is. Yes, the theory is that these are momentary events. That there's a long process leading up to that point, but then there's a single moment of entry into the experience. Would there be any concern for foraging plants and mushrooms with regard to Devas? I think not, as long as my feeling. I don't think this is really spelled out, but my feeling would be, as long as you don't completely deplete an area, and even if you take a fair share of the goods from the forest, then that you're a part of nature yourself. You're living. We are, all of us, living in the world. We're beings in nature. So we have. It's just being natural. Taking goods from the forest. Can we practice recollection of the Buddha's 9 qualities and dedicate the merit to pretas? Will the pretas receive food from this? Yes, any meritorious deed you can offer the merit, and meditating of any kind, it would be a meritorious deed. Do tree devas ever engage in good deeds, such as helping humans lost in the forest or injured in the forest, or protect humans living in the forest, etc.? Yeah, I think they do. We have stories about Devas saving shipwrecked sailors, for example. I don't really recall any story about them helping someone lost, but there are stories about Devas helping human beings that are suffering from hunger in lonely places. There's actually, from fairly modern times, there's a story in Ajahn Mun's biography, written by Ajahn Mahabua, concerning another monk. It was like a side story in the quite long, rambling book. Quite fascinating book, actually. That describes this monk who was on a long journey through the forest, and he had been a few days, I think 2 or 3 days, without coming across any villages to go for alms, and he was suffering from hunger. And he was sitting down resting, and he saw from behind a tree there emerged a human-like figure dressed in the costume of aristocrats of centuries ago, like Ayutthaya times, and this figure was carrying a platter full of food, and he came without a word. He came and offered it to the monk, and then disappeared behind the tree again. The Sarvastivadins believe that past, present, and future exist at once. Yes, yeah, I've given some talks on the nature of time and looking at the Sarvastivadin theory of time is quite interesting. And the way I interpret it is that, according to the Sarvastivadin view of time, that consciousness exists outside of time, and that the rest of the universe, so our consciousness is like a single moment, but it's a moment outside of time. And all the objects, that is the rest of the universe, arises in the future and moves backwards through time. And when it crosses the threshold of consciousness, that's experienced as the present. Then it falls behind us and it's experienced as memory. Do you say there are Bhuma Devas living in rivers? Or are they the same as Nagas? No, they're not the same as Nagas. There's one story about Devas in the Ganges River, that some traveler made merit. He was in a boat on the Ganges River, and he made merit by throwing some food into the river and offering it to the Devas of the river. And the Deva rewarded him by causing a fish to swallow a bag of jewels that was lying on the floor of the river, and then fishermen to catch the fish, and then they were selling it in the town where this traveler lived, and they sold it to the traveler. And when his wife was cutting it up to cook it, she found the bag of jewels. Could Moggallana see these Devas being formed as a psychic ability, but could Venerable Sariputta? Yeah, there is a story that Sariputta actually said that that he couldn't see any kind of any of these kind of beings. It's a story when a yaka hit Sariputta on the head, and while he was meditating, and Moggallana, coming along at the time, says, Venerable Sariputta, how was your meditation? He says, my meditation was quite good, except that now I have a slight headache. And Moggallana says, wonderful it is that the great Sariputta could be struck on the head by a mighty yaka with a blow that could cleave a mountain, and all he has is a slight headache. And Sariputta says, wonderful it is that the great Moggallana can see these invisible beings like yakas, when I myself cannot see even a Pamsapuka. It's a kind of the very most minor kind of yaka-like being in the forest. Bhante, considering Buddha's cosmic model, the sun is going around Ugandara. How would the sun appear directly above the equator? If we're going south, are we going into the mountain? Well, I wouldn't try and figure those things out too closely, because obviously that model doesn't stand up very well to observation. The idea, it doesn't go around Ugandara. It goes around Sinaru at the level of Ugandara, or maybe slightly higher. And day is experienced in Jambudipa when the sun is at the back of Sinaru. And at that time, daylight is experienced in Uttarakuru. So the idea even of an equator doesn't make any sense in that model, because we're not talking about a geocentric, or we're not talking about a round Earth. The idea of an equator only makes sense on a globe, but on a flat plane it doesn't make any sense. That certainly was the ending reveal in Spirited Away. I don't know that reference. In a previous video, you said that an Arahant asked a layperson to donate food to the Arahant, dedicate merit to the Arahants, pray to ancestors. Can the Arahant dedicate his own merit instead? Yes. Yeah, anybody can offer merit. But I guess the idea in that case was that the layperson had food to offer. Do you know if bodhisattva vow must be taken by all Mahayana monks, or is it optional to them? My understanding is that it's actually part of the ordination ceremony in Mahayana, so it's not optional. Okay, so it looks like we're slowing down here. So next time we'll talk about the Chatu Maharajaka, the four great kings, and that realm of Devas. Last question here: is there a clear difference between Devas and demons? Yes, I would. Demons I would class as asuras and hell beings, Mars. They're definitely quite different than the idea of Devas are elevated, and the demons are demonic forces of who themselves are in state of suffering, and they can cause suffering to others. Does your book include a list of all categories of Bhuma Devas? Yeah, I have a chapter on Bhuma Devas, and I think I pretty well certainly covered all the ones I could find any reference to. Okay, we'll leave it there, and talk to you again next week. Thank you for coming.